After number 87, what fantasy target should you even consider on this precarious Penguins squad? We'll break it all down for you on Tuesday's episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, sir. Welcome back inside the lab to the latest episode of your daily 30-minute source for fantasy hockey. It is the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast with Steele and Flip. Shout out to the everydayers holding us down, making us your first listen every single day. We see you, we appreciate you, and we're fired up to continue our NHL league-wide breakdown of every single team. Top 5 fantasy targets. We're working our way from the bottom to the top, baby, and today we arrive with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Mr. Roden, this one feels precarious. I truly mean it. I look at Sidney Crosby, and if you take away that player's performance and quality to really impact games at both ends of the ice, and I think this Penguins club is due for an extremely rough ride in what's a very much improved Eastern Conference. So, top 5 targets. I got a couple of honorable mentions, but I would say be very careful with what you're doing with Pittsburgh Penguins assets, not named Sidney Crosby.
Slim pickings for the Pittsburgh Penguins fantasy hockey-wise. They only had 3 players finish in the top 100 fantasy Yahoo rankings at the end of the regular season, and two of them were between the 85th and 95th spots there. So Sidney Crosby is in an own league of his own when it comes to the fantasy hockey realm of the Pittsburgh Penguins. You just said it very well off the top. We'll talk about why he is still a potential first-round pick later in this episode. And if you get him somewhere in the second round, that it's an absolute steal. So starting at number 5, again, very precarious. Definitely some players to keep an eye on for. I think there are a few very good streaming options throughout the season as well. I really liked what Matt Grzelcyk was bringing on the back end towards the middle to end of the regular season for the Pittsburgh Penguins, peripheral wise as well. Deep cut again for you and I. We have 16 owners in our league, so we are looking at some of these deep cuts. I like what Matt Grzelcyk did at some points of the season. You know, they also got Philip Tomasino in a trade halfway through the season. What could he possibly do for the Pittsburgh Penguins? There's a few options out there. Those would be my 2 honorable mentions, as well as Chris Letang. He doesn't make the top 5 for me. I went a little bit of a different route at number 5. I gave it to Tristan Jarry. I think he is a great goaltender that falls into that 0G strategy-esque type of situation going into the fantasy hockey draft. Obviously, a very bad, disappointing season. Got kind of left out to dry so far with the team that has been assembled in front of him. I'm not saying it was all his fault, but he had a lot to do with his downfall this last year. An .892 save percentage, a 3.12 goals against average. Still somehow finished with a winning record of 16-12-6 on the year. But after it really came back when he was brought back up from the Scranton Penguins, the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins.
Yes, sir.
Spent some time there throughout the middle of the season, came back up, found a little bit of his groove, kind of lost it again at some points, but Tristan Jarry falls into that 5th spot for me. I'm willing to take a chance on him as my 2nd or even 3rd goaltender off the board. Maybe it doesn't pan out that way, but sometimes when you're so focused on forwards and defensemen, you get left with those goaltenders as the last resort option.
And let's be clear, precarious is a word that is going to continue to come up because, look, in a 16-team league, Steele, not even keeper, just year to year, you are going to have to take players, especially goaltenders, that you know it's going to be a battle. It's going to be a week-to-week situation of you playing the matchups, seeing what these teams have in terms of a schedule and how they're playing. And Tristan Jarry is that prototypical goaltender who, unfortunately, He's been left out to dry. Has he had his times of inconsistent play? Sure. But still, in his career, almost a 910 save percentage. Goals against under 3. To me, that means fantasy relevant. And he's still just hit 30 years old. What this team is able to do, Steele, at both ends of the ice is a serious concern for me. When I looked at these numbers, and I remember last year, the Pittsburgh Penguins were glaringly bad at a few points of the season. And how about this? They allowed the third most goals in the NHL at 287, tied for with the Buffalo Sabres. Only the Sharks and Blackhawks got scored on more. That's a tough sell for putting a goaltender into the top 5. I don't blame you, though, because honestly, after the top 4, and I know the top, 4, 3, 2 spots are a little bit interchangeable as well. I had Chris Letang at 5, took him out. I had Tristan Jarry at 5, took him out. And I had Evgeny Malkin now in at 5, and I left him there. We're splitting hairs here, and not in a good way. None of those players are players that I'm really going after. And I guess what I'm buying into with Malkin, yes, there is now an injury concern. He is going to be 39 years old, Steele, by the time this season starts. The upside is still there. The offensive potency can still rear its head. I know this is a tough sell. I know it is. Because also when you look at the peripherals, you're not going to get a ton. 48 block shots, 32 hits. All I'm saying is when I see 50 points from Malkin in 68 games, and remember how hot he started last year, if he can channel some of that offensive potency that clearly he still has as one of the best offensive players of his generation, I'd say he is worth the risk. Is Tristan Jarry a little bit of a safer option, quote unquote, at the 5 spot? Probably. Hit me with Malkin. I have this weird feeling, this one last push, you got Crosby's last hope here. Maybe these veterans come up with one last little bit of magic. I don't mean cup, but maybe they pull it out of their you-know-whats just a little bit this year.
Speaking of veterans as well, at number 4, I have Erik Karlsson. And again, I think Evgeny Malkin is a very decent option. I still think he's one of those streamer guys I would put in that description. Because totally. he was under 50% pretty much all season long. Again, maybe at the start of the season, he was somewhere around 65, 70, but other than that, he dropped off quickly. I believe he ended the year at 42%. Injury concerns, like you said. I have Erik Karlsson at number 4. And like we knew it was going to happen after that career year of 101 points in San Jose, we knew he was going to fall back to earth. We didn't think that he was going to go back. He was going to go further down to hell at that point, but he fell hard from 101 points to 56 points. And he followed that up with another 50-plus point season as well. So back-to-back seasons of 50-plus
Still valuable.
Points. Very valuable. Hasn't missed a game in 3 years now. So even at 34, soon to be 35 years old, durable right now. He had some injury concerns for a couple of seasons throughout his prime, but he's been great. He's playing better hockey. He's playing smarter hockey. He's not putting himself in some of those dangerous situations. And maybe that's why his offensive production has taken quite a bit of a hit. But I'm completely fine with 10 plus goals, 40 plus assists, somewhere from 50 to 60 points, because peripherally, he's still been consistent as he has been throughout his entire NHL career for the most part. 191 shots, 94 blocks, 29 hits. Still gets power play one time as well. I'm not even looking at the plus minus of minus 24. Don't really matter. Doesn't really care about that. Power play assists, 13. Power play goals, 2. So the power play wasn't great this year for Pittsburgh. It wasn't terrible, but there's things to work on. Kyle Dubas has a really big job in front of him this offseason. Again, to give Crosby, to give Letang, to give Karlsson and Malkin this last chance, this last hope at a potential deep run in the playoffs, potential Stanley Cup win. Erik Karlsson, fantasy-wise, I still think he brings a ton of value to this team.
I agree.
Just bring up where he finished. His pre-rank at the beginning of the season was 99. He finished 176th. So definitely a lot of reaching on a guy like Erik Karlsson. I think he falls somewhere in that 14th to 15th round. I can see him even going higher just because of the value that he brings with playing on the first power play unit with Sidney Crosby.
The Pittsburgh Penguins are projected to have over $24 million in cap space. That puts them in the top 10, right at the bottom, but the top 10 in terms of teams with the most upcoming cap space. When I look at the makeup of this squad, Steele, there's far too many Philip Tomassinos, Kevin Hayes, a whole lot of middle six, bottom sixers, if you get me. And you look at the blue line, and then you package that with two backup goaltenders, quote unquote, for the most part, in terms of what they've been able to put up in terms of numbers. And could I see Crosby resurrecting them from the ashes into a playoff spot? Sure. But after that, I just don't see it. I think you and I have the exact same top four. I got Erik Karlsson at 4. This is a player that's intriguing to me, though, Steele, because
let's talk about it after the break. We're getting
let's talk about it after the
Let's
break.
talk about
Thank you very much, because I'm excited to talk about more teams on this list. The Pittsburgh Penguins, not exactly sexy. We're trying to keep you ready for the upcoming draft. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Indeed. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. With Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed. Sponsored jobs. Put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. You ever been in that spot where you need to hire yesterday? That's where Indeed comes in, where right now you can speed up the hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support the show by saying you heard about this on the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Terms and conditions apply. You're hiring? Indeed is all you need.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Continue to smash that subscribe button, the follow button. Leave a 5-star review for your boys here, Flip Livingstone and Steele Roden. Over to you, my friend, Erik Karlsson, why you also have him at number 4 and where you see the value with him.
Well, you mentioned the Pittsburgh Penguins power play. They finished 6th best in the NHL last year at 25.8 proficiency. That leaves me a little bit intrigued to see what Sidney Crosby can still mean to an offensive unit's potency. So I actually think Erik Karlsson could provide the kind of punch to your blue line in fantasy circles that takes your team over the top. And when I say that, I mean that because other GMs are going to sleep on him. They are going to forget that, Penguins are bad. Yes, he has dipped now 3 years in a row in terms of production, or 2 years in a row. And the fall off from 101 should have been predicted. 94 blocks the year before, Steele. 99 the year before that, 90. He has been consistent with the peripheral numbers.
Yes, he has been.
And when you come in with 50 points, the 101 was an outlier, and everyone wants to think, oh, this is disappointing. If you're getting 56 points from a 34-year-old blue liner and nearly 100 blocks and 50 hits, I'm going to take those D-men all day, Steele, because that provides a whole ton of coverage. And if this team does improve even a little bit, again, hard sell, I think there's a ton of value in Erik Karlsson. I have a feeling we have the exact same top 3. We should anyway. Over to you for your number 3 slot. This is one of those teams, though. We've now gone from gold mine to, graveyard. I'm going to say this is definitely in the direction of graveyard, but still value to be had.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go
maybe middle of the pack.
Saying somewhere in the middle of the pack, because the top 3 are actually very valuable. And the top 3 that we're going to talk about, all 3 of them were 30-plus goal scorers this past year. All 3 of them were 60-plus point producers as well. And then also bring the peripheral stats to back it up. So at number 3, again, we probably have the same list. At number 3, I have Bryan Rust, 31 goals, 34 assists, 65 points. He's gotten better and better the last 3 seasons as well. It's kind of funny how some of these veterans for Pittsburgh just continue to get better, but the team's playing so bad overall. 46 points when he was 30 years old 3 years ago, then follows that up with 56 points in 62 games, and then last season, 65 points in 71 games, 62 hits, 54 blocks, 190 shots. The shot total has been very consistent over the last 4 years. There have been some injury concerns with Bryan Rust. He plays 71 games, then 62, then 81, then 60, then 56. So it kind of varies with this player. Again, sometimes fluky, sometimes just putting himself in bad situations. But that's what happens when you get a little bit older. For Brian
Thank you.
Rusto, for Brian Rusto, 31 goals, career high for him, 34 assists, ties his career high, and then also a career high in 65 points. So he was the player third best on the Pittsburgh Penguins at the end of the regular season. He was projected at 200. His pre-rank was 225. He finished 93rd. So he was in the top 100, finished somewhere in that 8th to 9th round area of your fantasy hockey draft. And if you got him past the 12th or 13th, you're probably laughing right now because of how much value he brought to your squad.
When you have the chemistry that Brian Rust has with Sidney Crosby, and clearly that is something that has kept the two players together, you got to tap into it. Because Brian Rust, not off the page, I love to gush on Sid, we'll get there, is you got to jump all over that steal. And that's one of those things that this team is hard for me to predict in terms of where it's going to be. Because what I was trying to bring up there before our internet started to fail us heavy is I was trying to bring up the standings around them in the Eastern Conference. Because realistically, when I do look at those standings, and we've talked about teams in the Metro, like the Ottawa Senators taking a step, the Montreal Canadiens taking a step, the Rangers still being there. The Devils are rumored to be going out there heavily in the offseason and making moves. I don't see a whole ton of space for the Pittsburgh Penguins to be fitting in, not with this roster. So I think that's where we perhaps have to separate that from the fantasy value. I'm here with it with Brian Rust, 31 goals at 32 years old is something that I'm going to pay attention to. It's the Sidney Crosby effect, baby. But I think we need to pay attention to a player like Rickard Rakell as well. You know, if you're good with it, I'm down to move on to him because I think you have him at 2 as well.
Yes, we do.
Look, a couple of years ago in Anaheim, he put up 20 goals, 21 assists, even before that, 34 goals, 35 assists. Back in 2018, he was an all-star. We started to pay attention to this guy, especially because we know he can bring some peripheral coverage as well. That season, 115 hits. He's back, Steele. He's back to playing how he could. And I think it just took him a whole long time to figure out how being in every NHLer takes 35, 26 even strength goals, 116 hits, 203 shots on net. That's fantasy relevant. Can he run it back? I don't know if I want to expect 70 points per se, but I'm fine to project 60 to 65. And if he's bringing me almost 100 blocks and over 100 hits, boom, bap. He becomes the second most valuable fantasy piece on this team, at least in our categorical leagues. I like this player, Steele. I just don't know why he hasn't been able to figure it out up until the past, let's say year and a half where he's looked real good.
Yeah, it's interesting just because coming off that season of 2023, 2024, he had 15 goals and 37 points in 70 games. So it was very confusing going into the season what he was actually going to do because 2 seasons ago he had 60 points. Then he followed that up with 37 points, and you're like, okay, maybe he's slowing down. Maybe this team is not tracking again the overall depth of where they were at. Maybe they're headed in the wrong direction. He still follows that up with a career-high 70 points at 31 years old, 116 hits, over 110-plus hits the last 3 seasons, 77 career blocks, a career high for him, 203 shots as well. It is that Sidney Crosby effect. So he was the second-best player for the Pittsburgh Penguins fantasy hockey-wise. He finished the season. He was actually projected at the beginning of the season. His pre-rank was 264. He finished the season 85th. So again, somewhere in the likes of where Brian Rust was, both in the pre-rank and where he actually finished. I would put both those players somewhere in the 7th, 8th, 9th, even 10th round. If you get them somewhere around there, I think you're going to be laughing as well because, again, what they're bringing peripherally, as well as how good, like you said, top 6, was it? They were the 6th best power play in the league this past
number
season.
6. Yep.
And again, the Sidney Crosby effect of playing with him. So Rickard Rakell, number 2 on both our lists. We always know who will come in at number 1. Sidney Crosby. We're going to talk about him after the break. This episode is also brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like playoff hockey. The energy, the rivalries, the nonstop action. With the Stanley Cup playoffs heating up, and of course the Stanley Cup finals, there's never been a better time to see it live, and Game Time makes getting it into the building fast and affordable. Game Time gives you last-minute ticket deals, zone deals for deep discounts, panoramic seat views, and all-in pricing with no hidden fees. Plus, ticket prices often drop the closer you get to puck drop, so you can score big without overpaying. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And once again, thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Smash that subscribe button. We appreciate you out there. We love you out there. Thank you so much for tuning in to this Tuesday episode covering the Pittsburgh Penguins top 5 fantasy hockey targets. Sidney Crosby, number one on the list, number one in our hearts, number one for flips, big time bets. Anytime Crosby assists, you know that's banging out pretty much every single night.
Yeah.
Would you put Sidney Crosby in the first round of the fantasy hockey draft? If you're in a 16-team league, does he still make the first round, or does he fall into the early second?
That is an excellent question, Steele, honestly, because one of the hardest things to do in fantasy hockey is separate some of that buzz of what a name can bring to what he brings on the ice, because these names can get super sexy. And conversely, you can overlook a name like, let's not forget, Brendan Hagel finished 1 point behind Sidney Crosby, and those names, right, are going to catch a whole bunch of different attention. Yes, he is still a first-round draft choice in deep leagues. 14 to 16 team league, Steele, he is a back end of that draft first-round pick all day, all night, in my opinion. However, at some point, he is going to slow down. I'm not going to say it's this year, though. You just saw this guy dominate at Four Nations. You just saw what he did at the World Championship. It's coming, but it's not this year. Let me spit this at you as well. Over the last 3 seasons, since turning 35 years old, regular season numbers, 244 games played, Steele. He missed 2 games over the last 3 years since turning 35. He has 278 points in those 244 games. 22 game-winning goals. He also, for some reason, has found his snarl later in his career. Last year was the first time he put up triple digits in hits in his career. And yeah, down to 67 this year. 67 hits, 40 block shots, 31 penalty minutes, and I still get 90-plus points from Sidney Crosby? Yeah, he's still a first-round draft pick. I'm not going to get crazy. I'm not going to take him over some players that I think are going to fall into that slot, at the back end of the first round, perhaps a Jack Eichel in there or something like that. I'm probably still going to lean to Jack Eichel, but it's close. And I would say this time next year, if the Penguins are as hot garbage as we expect, maybe we're talking about this differently. But for now, with that sparkle still in his eye, I'm going with Crosby at the end of the first round. Yes, he is such a special player, Steele. You know how much I like talking about Sid. And after everything we saw him do this past season for his club, country, and the game of hockey, I don't know how you could ever say a single, and I mean this, a single bad thing about number 87. You're on mute. That was perfect timing for a mute.
That was perfect timing. And you can't. There's no way you can complain about this player. And Sidney Crosby is one of the best still in the game. And I think if you have anything larger than a 10-team league, he's still a first-round pick. If you're in a 10-team league, I see him falling into the early second round.
Yep.
Even for, doesn't matter what format. Categorical league,
Agreed.
Head-to-head fantasy points. His pre-rank for Fantasy Yahoo was 28. He finished 12th. He is a first-round draft pick.
Boom.
And I don't even care because I know you said he might start slowing down, maybe not this season. Even if he starts slowing down, he's still going to put up 70 plus, 80 plus points. It doesn't matter because the last 3 seasons now, like you said, he's only missed 2 games, but he's had 3 consecutive years of 90 plus points.
So
and that's
good.
with the team that has been assembled around him, with Chris Letang's health issues, with Evgeny Malkin's health issues, with Erik to 50 points, with Tristan just absolutely being brutal last season as well. The team has been brutal around him, but he keeps on providing for you out there. We love him. He's near and dear to Flip's heart for big-time bets, of course. Sidney Crosby, number 1 on the list. I still think he's a first-round draft pick, early second round at the latest, but he just brings up so much value. 10 game-winning goals, a career high for Sid the Kid this last season. 37 years old. I still think he can put up another 90-point year. He's going to be all over the radar. I still think he actually might drop a little bit to the late second round.
Yeah, I can see
that because of the aging factor, because of how bad Pittsburgh is. And like you said, there's just so many good teams in the Eastern Conference. Doesn't matter. He's producing 3 straight years of 90-plus points. That is the top 5 list. Flip, any last words?
No, all I got to say is, like, I try to keep it legit when I gush on players. This dude was at rookie off-season training camp for all the first-year players in there practicing after the World Championships finish still. He was continuing to be on the ice, giving back to the community, giving back to the game that's given him so much. When we lose Ovi and Sid, this game loses a lot of its backbone. And I just hope this next generation of stars is ready to take it as seriously as players like Sidney Crosby has done, both on and off the ice deal. And I don't want to get off on a tangent, but that is really going to be an angle that this game is going to miss. And it's one of those things that you don't know how good you got it until it's gone, fantasy or otherwise, with number 87.
Truer words have never been spoken about fantasy hockey. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night, until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale from both Flip and I. We wish you good luck with your bets. The Stanley Cup Finals, Edmonton, Florida, and we shall see you back here again tomorrow.
Peace.